Mr. Weitman, thank you for joining us. What made Bernard Madoff do what he did?
What were his motives? Well, that's a great question, and I'm afraid that I don't have an answer. I'm afraid that at this point no one really has an answer. It's actually mind-boggling to think that he's been involved in such a fraud for such a long time without any clear reason. Because, as we all know, Bernard Madoff had a broker company which was doing very well already back in the 70s and the 80s, and he was making a lot of money just out of the supposedly at least legitimate business. And therefore, it's hard to understand why he started going into this scheme, which eventually, had to collapse sooner or later, and send him to jail.
What's the chief thrust of your book, Mr. Weitman?
Well, basically, I disagree with what has been said just now and by Michael Ockrent. I think, and that's the chief thrust of my book, and is to show that really people didn't know, and it's, I think, much too easy to just say, they took money, and that's enough, and because they took money, then they went into Madoff, and full stop. I think that Bernie Madoff managed to deceit and defraud some of the world's best and more intelligent and more experienced investors in hedge funds in the world, and you can't just say those guys were just all in it for the money. I think the truth of the matter is that Bernie Madoff's genius was to his ability to gain the trust and the confidence of his clients, not only his private clients but his institutional clients. And I think, and that's what I've tried to show, is that contrary again to what Mr. Ockrent just said, I think his scheme was credible to a certain extent, obviously.
I mean, how do you say it was credible? Because obviously, if you're promising a huge return,
he was not promising anything. That's something that has been said a lot, and it's not true. He was not promising. All he said is that here are my returns, and my goal is to try to get anywhere between, let's say, 10 and 12 or maybe 15%, and that's a standard goal for hedge funds. So the goal was not was not so incredible. I think you have many hedge funds in the world, and just think about people like George Soros, Michael Steinhardt, and others who've returned much higher returns over the years. For someone like Jim Cramer, for instance, who's been very critical of the investors, all these guys have returned much higher returns over the years than Bernie Madoff. What actually attracted people to Madoff were not so much his returns as his complete lack of volatility, i.e., his ability to give those returns without, as people perceived it, without risk. And that's where that was the problem. But the returns in and of themselves were not so exceptional. And he could explain. I mean, part of the to write my book, I went and I spoke to some of the largest investors in Madoff's funds, and these guys have been doing business with him for many years. And I'm not saying that they didn't have questions, but they also had answers. And that's I think a point that has been completely overlooked, or not completely, but mainly overlooked by mainstream media, which was to say all these guys are just irresponsible, they're just greedy, all they want is money, and they didn't do their due diligence.
Mr. Weitman, $150 billion in terms of losses estimated by some investigators. Among those, charities that Madoff was quoted as helping. Oh, well, I'll bargain you down to 65 then. Let's leave it at 65 then, $65 billion. And among those victims, charities that he'd been credited with helping, Jewish charities, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt, and I think I wrote it very clearly that Bernie Madoff is the prince of evil. It's an incredibly evil person who had this incredible ability of defrauding his family, his best friends, his oldest business partners, his charities, people like Elie Wiesel, the Peace, the Nobel Peace Prize, and the Shoah survivor, and people like Carl Shapiro, who actually is the one who launched him into business, and people like that, and you're just wondering, how can someone do something like that?
Mr. Weitman, we need to leave it there. Thank you very much for your